Actually, I'm going to turn to both Doreen and Nathan for this next question. Support groups. What are the good sides for our patients? What are maybe not so good sides for our patients? My patients come back from support groups and I hear different kinds of stories. Doreen, what do you think?
Overall, I think it's beneficial, but you don't have to be committed that you go every single time they meet. I think support groups are good, but it's mixed. You don't necessarily have to go every time they meet. You can go as you need it. I think you hear side effects from other people that may not pertain to you, and that can cause worry. But then you can also hear good stories. So you kind of have to just modulate it to your own mood and your own needs. I actually belong to 2 support groups. One is CLL specific with the CLL Society that really helps me with the education part of it. The other is a general cancer support group. And there are people there with all different kinds of cancers, and sometimes their outcomes are not as good. And so it can be sad to lose people that you've become close to, but I think you just have to know when you dip in and when you pull back, and that's a personal decision.
Nathan?
I actually help run the Nashville CLL Society group here, and she's right that different people can take different things from it. We try to pretty much push their website. It's run by a doctor. It has a board of other CLL specialist doctors that review content, and of course, Leukemia LLS site has great resources as well. What I try to tell people one-on-one is that, well, many people have this disease. We're all different, and I can hope that I'm in a certain demographic in the data, but it doesn't. There's always outliers. So, and some people are very upbeat. Some people are, have issues with depression. If you have an issue with depression, this is going to take more of a toll on you than someone that's more upbeat. And it's hard to see. I'm 45. I'm diagnosed and I'm treated within 7 months, and then you meet someone who's had it for 20 years and hasn't had to have anything. But so we're all different, and you try to offer what support you can.
I think the skill of the leader of those groups is really important in guiding the conversation, so it's not all negative or all positive, but allows people to speak. And so finding the group that you feel comfortable with.
And we always try to push having a CLL specialist in your corner. You may not necessarily need to see them for every visit, but they need to be part of your treatment plan, so that they're making sure that you're going to go down the right treatment path for you, or at least you're given the options. And if you choose to go a different route, you've at least been informed and know the risks of each option.
Okay, Lisa, you ready? I've been saving this question for you.
Oh, goodness.
I know. One of the most common questions I get from my patients is, what do I tell my kids? Yeah, I knew that. Okay, so take a moment. Walk us through that. Nathan's diagnosed, and how do you tell your kids? When do you tell your kids? How much do you tell your kids?
So we have always been very open, especially with medical things or body things, health things. Because Nathan is a nurse, we've always kind of talked about it in like age-appropriate clinical terms. So when Nathan was diagnosed, we actually found out right before our oldest daughter went to a week of space camp down in Alabama. And I did not want to tell her before she went away for 5 days and had to worry about her dad. Yeah. So and at the same time, my younger daughter was staying with my mother in Alabama while my older daughter was at space camp. So Nathan and I actually had a week where we could talk about how we're going to tell our oldest. Our youngest was 5. So she was pretty young, and I didn't really think she was going to be as affected by it. So when we got our older daughter home, we were sitting outside on the back porch, and we just said, not bluntly, but I mean, there's no other way to say it. Daddy has cancer. And then we talked a little bit about, you know, what we knew at the time was not a lot, but I think by that time we knew it wasn't like he was going to die tomorrow. And so we told her, we said that there's a lot of treatments, there's a lot of hope here, and she didn't want to talk about it for a while. She went to her room, she cried, and then it just became a normal. It started as a normal conversation. We talked about it at dinner time, you know, whatever our previous topics were. This became something that we just discussed, and as Nathan learned new things, we would just discuss it. And one of the things that we do at dinner time is we talk about the 2 good things and 1 bad thing from your day, so that our kids can focus on, like, there's more good things that are happening than bad. And it became this point where every bad thing was, well, Daddy has cancer. So after like a few weeks of this, I'm like, okay, the bad thing cannot be that Daddy has cancer. Like, what else is going on? Let's focus. Let's try to bring this back to, you still have to live your lives. So I think you have to figure out what works for each of your kids. When my oldest, like we told her, my personality is I want to talk about everything. Hers isn't. And you shouldn't force them to go against their personality. Eventually they'll open up. They did start like a father-daughter diary, where if she wasn't comfortable verbally asking a question, she could write it in the diary and give it to him, and he could respond to her in writing. They did that for a little bit. With our youngest one, she was just like, okay, Daddy has cancer. And he took her to the library, and she was like, she's very extroverted. So she met this little girl and her mom, and she's like, oh, we just moved here, and my mom works in Louisville, and my dad just found out he has cancer. You know, so she was young enough that she could talk about it without realizing the impact. So you have to allow for that too. And I'm grateful that there were, you know, a couple of different, like my kids have very different personalities. So it kind of allowed us to tailor it to each of them.
I'll add that, like I discussed earlier, this was all based off information off my first local oncologist. So it was, you're going to get a port and get chemo in 3 months, and we had just moved there, so I was expecting to be sick a few times a month, and so that was what drove that. If I had to give my personal advice for people going through this, it would be, you know, see your specialist, get an idea what treatment's going to look like and when, if you have a few months of labs, so that you can, you know, not just have to go through that very quickly like we do, because, you know, we thought we were in a rush when we weren't at all. And then this comes up quite frequently in forums and with people. I would say, you know, they ask advice about how to tell your kid, and I always say, you know your child, I don't. You should know what your child can handle and what, you know. So for me personally, advice off the internet for that, you know, you might say my kid is very outgoing and this is how we told her, but I would let that choice up to that parent.
Ian?
That's great advice, right? I mean, I don't know that you can have one way of having this conversation, and every family and every dynamic is different. And you also have a very young family. Most patients with CLL are older, and their children are either teenagers or adults, and so it's a very different conversation.
Doreen?
You have to be careful about what you share in professionally, and depending on what age you are. So once it's out, it's out. So you might want to just share with your closest immediate friends and your supervisor if need be, based on your treatment and the medical follow-up appointments that you have. So I think it's good to share for your soul, to share it with people. But you also have to be aware that there are ramifications professionally and socially as well. So share on an as-needed basis.